Okay, let's move on. Some good news. You know, this is something we very rarely get to report here. So we compiled a bunch of stories where obviously we've talked a lot about the supply chain crisis, about semiconductors in particular, the chips which are going to run everything. They really do determine our future. It's why you can't buy a new car right now. It's why right now in the United States we have a critical shortage, which I will get to. Well, that shortage, well, yes, it's been awful and it has, driven prices up for millions and millions of people. It has made life more miserable, is at least forcing some companies in order to reconsider globalization and start trying to build things in America again. Look at that, Krystal. It turns out it was that simple the entire time. So let's put this up there on the screen. This is a first really good piece of news from the Detroit Free Press. GM is going to invest $7 billion in 4 facilities across Michigan, creating 4,000 jobs. 4,000 is a paltry sum compared to the millions that were lost to China after the entry into the WTO, but it's something. And even more important is that these $2.6 billion will be building a new battery factory actually in Lansing, Michigan, and $4 billion to convert an existing factory to make electric pickups. So making America the domestic future for electric vehicles, making it so that we can fulfill our destiny if we really do want to do something about our use of petroleum and try to transfer to an electric future. We are a decade or more behind China in terms of their domestic supply chain. This is what they were doing in 2008, 2009. So we have still a big catch up to do, but look, this is a real thing that I want to point to, give props to GM, props also to the people who, the union, which was involved as well. They're very, very happy about this. I think that's awesome. Let's put this next one up there on the screen. Another really good piece of news. I'll tell you why also I'm so excited about this one is Intel is investing $20 billion in an Ohio chip-making facility. And what I'm really happy about in these two cases is that the two things that we just announced, they're not in the Sun Belt, in Arizona, in Texas, in Georgia, which, look, nothing against those states, but they've been doing a little bit too well. I'm joking, but that's where the population growth is coming. Some of the more downwardly mobile parts of the United States were being neglected. So to see Michigan and Ohio, the people there who suffered so much from globalization, to see these, $27 billion of capital being injected into their states, this is great stuff. Also because this is not only 3,000 permanent jobs in terms of the chip-making facility and the eventual fab which will come, but it actually is going to bring in $100 billion over the next decade. And what did we learn with GM and the plant closures all throughout the mid-2000s? It's not just about the plants. There's stuff around them. There's the dry cleaner, which services the guys who work there. There's the restaurants. Then there are the people who sell the stuff to the GM plant, the raw inputs. The more of that we onshore bring into the domestic supply chain, number one, we rule our future. It's not acceptable to be reliant upon a foreign rival power in order to power the technology that we need in order to, number one, be competitive, but two, to live. And then the third is that we need to at least forge a way that you don't have to be in the information economy. The information economy is not for everybody, and that's fine. And you shouldn't have to be relegated to serfdom in serving the people in the information economy in order to survive. So this is exactly what's missing from the U.S. economy right now. It is, look, it's not enough. We lost hundreds of billions, so this is $27 billion, but it's something, and it makes it so that other companies can follow suit. I also want to give props to the Biden administration. They did, praise Intel, all of that. Thank you, by the way. This is exactly what the government should be doing. So 2 pieces of really good news that we have.
Yeah, on the Michigan GM news too, it's unclear in Ohio, but these will be union jobs. And that
GM, exactly.
That matters a lot as well. We got some numbers just recently that even though we've covered, of course, the Great Resignation and the union drives in Starbucks and all of those things, union density continued to fall significantly last year, in part, I'm sure, because of the continued effects of the pandemic, and in part because, listen, we've been in a 40-year trend of union density ultimately falling. That matters a lot in terms of just having some countervailing force to push back against the imperative of corporate America to just fixate on profits and to shrink and shrink and shrink the share of the pie that is going to the workforce. So little moves like this that help to bolster the labor movement. I mean, a big part of why you've had the labor movement crumble and fall apart is because you did have this massive outsourcing of jobs that had been previously unionized. So helping to rebuild that, even in a small way, makes a big difference. To your point about about the follow-on effects from, the investments here. With regards to Michigan, they say for each new full-time job created at a factory, typically 2 more jobs are created elsewhere in the state in relation to that plant. Small businesses thrive. I mean, it's just creates a much healthier ecosystem. And if you've lived in this part of the country where you've seen those factory jobs go away, you see the way that it just strips the whole lifeblood out of a community. So in a rare instance to see a little bit of that injected back in is heartening, even though, again, we shouldn't overstate the scale of this. It's sad that it took a global pandemic, catastrophic supply chain failure for the capitalists involved to be like, it might have been better if we weren't so dependent on everywhere else in the world. It might have been better for us. This is not charity. They're not doing this because they care about Michiganders or they care about unions. Furthest from that it could possibly be. It's because they have calculated that this supply chain issue has been a massive hit to their bottom line, and that maybe if they had invested a little bit more here in having native capacity, then they would be in a better position to profit right now. Of course, the trend over decades, and this is a big part of why we're having the price increases and all the issues that we're having right now, the trend over decades has been towards just in time. Yes. The trend over decades has been towards, hey, let's shave off whatever we can from labor costs, no matter where we're pushing it around the world. And that has made these companies and our supply chains extremely fragile. If there's one thing we should have learned in the pandemic, it's that, listen, as a country, we have to have some of our own native capacity to build things, and in particular, be able to create things like PPE, which we learned was, sourced around the world. So with regards to the chips, you probably know more about this than I do, but there was a bill that passed through the Senate.
Yeah, the CHIPS Act.
That's still hanging out in the House. So I don't know what's going on with that, why they haven't pushed that forward, but you look at China and why they have such an advantage on these things. It's because they have a national strategy, because they have priorities, because they say, listen, this industry is important to us. We want to be a global leader in it. We're going to invest in it. We're going to make it happen. Now, that's a lot easier when you have an authoritarian government, effectively. But obviously, there are values other than just shareholders making a buck and corporate bottom line that our country should be investing in here as well. And we shouldn't be dependent on the global corporations to experience, a once-in-a-lifetime pandemic to realize that we need to go in a slightly different direction.
I completely agree, and I want to also reiterate what you said. Let's go ahead and put that next one up there on the screen. This is from the Columbus Dispatch, and they specifically tell the story of how Ohio got this. Some of it I'm not the biggest fan of, which is basically throwing massive tax incentives.
I actually thought it was kind of gross, yeah.
Yeah, look, it is what it is. I personally don't like these, reality-style shows in order to lure companies, but I get it. But within that story, and something that's very important, is specifically the passage of the CHIPS for America Act that passed the Senate, which includes $52 billion for semiconductor research, design, and manufacturing. And the knowledge that Intel had that some of that funding would eventually come towards them, specifically through the CHIPS Act once it has passage. So, look, government can influence these decisions. Don't let anybody tell you it's just like some raucous free market. And this is the other thing about China.
Market. Give me a break.
I interviewed this guy named Stephen Levine, who writes about electric cars. This was over on the realignment, but we spent over an hour talking about this around the electric car domestic supply chain. And he explained very, 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 in a scary way, really, about how China, as you said, identified 12 years ago. They were like, we're going electric. We're going all electric. Execute. And so they went all over the world. We did that New York Times story here that we covered about how they acquired the rights to these cobalt mines and the raw materials. Then they brought in Tesla, threw a bunch of money at them, and were like, hey, go ahead and build our domestic supply chain for us. Bring the sourcing, which they did. And now China's electric cars are on par with Tesla. These are real cars. They're really, really good electric cars. They are over a decade ahead of us, not only in the control of the supply, but also, frankly, soon, and you can already see this out in San Francisco, some people are buying the Chinese electric cars because they're more fun to drive. So this is something where our lack of action has left us a decade behind whenever it comes to this. Of course, the fact that the CHIPS Act languishes in the House of Representatives under Nancy Pelosi is a perfect example of why, but still, it influenced the decision making and is bringing real jobs to the state of Ohio, real jobs to the state of Michigan, jobs that they rightfully deserve and which were taken from them as a result of failures by our government. And just to give you an example of how vulnerable we are, put this next one up there, which is that some manufacturers who rely on semiconductors are down to less than 5 days of inventory. 5 days. You know, I've told you this before, Krystal, but there are stories coming out of people who are buying new cars with empty slots inside of them, where the dealers are promising, yeah, in like a year we'll slot in that, GPS. I'm not buying a car like that. I mean, what kind of madness is this? No wonder the used car market is so hot. But that's the problem, which is we don't have the chips. GM factories, speaking of union jobs more, have had to go dark for like 3 weeks, 4 weeks. I mean, can you imagine not working for a month? What would you do?
I've got a good friend in Louisville who's been in this situation who works at the truck assembly plant there. And they've just had shutdown after shutdown because this part, that part. And the biggest thing is the chips and then that creates tremendous uncertainty for them and your life. I mean, it's just a total cascading
What are you going to do? Yeah, not pay rent for a month? This is madness. And so this has cascading effects, the jobs, the manufacturing. It's about being a real country. This is what it looks like. All the new tech companies in the world cannot solve the fact that it's freaking hard to build cars. It's hard to build stuff. Even these cameras here. We ordered our fancy computer thanks to our premium subscribers in order to export our show properly. That took like 2 months in order to get because we needed the highest end chips in order to process it. So yes, even us lowly podcasters are suffering as a result of the supply chain crisis.
Feel bad for us, guys. That's really the point of this.
Look, we don't matter.
That's important.
We don't even matter close to these people who really deserve it. They need it. They've been screwed over for 20 years. We need 10 times more of this. So finally, some good news that we can actually report to you.
Yeah, indeed. So we try to not only bring you the outrage, but also the small slivers of hope that we do see.
Bingo.
Hey guys, thanks so much for watching.
That's right. Just as a reminder, you can become a premium subscriber today. Watch the full show completely uncut. Our reactions to each other's monologues. You get to listen to it. You get to ask us questions. All that good stuff. Link is right there in the description or at breakingpoints.com.
Best of all, great way to say screw you to the mainstream media.